In this video I'll demonstrate how to create a lining pattern for a jacket. So here is our construction or our working pattern, and this is a men's block. So here's the front and the back lined up along the side seam there, and these are all the things that have been done to the construction, and these are the pattern pieces. So here are the front and back pattern piece, and here is the front lining piece and facing, a back lining piece and facing, and here are the pattern pieces for the pockets, and over here is the sleeve. So just in terms of the construction, before you do a lining you want to be sure that you have your facings drawn in. So you draw in your facing there, so generally speaking coming back 5 centimeters here and 5 centimeters here from the center front line, always 5 centimeters in, and then doing a nice line there, and you shade that in with those lines to differentiate it so it sticks out and you can see it clearly. And then here is the back neck facing. So once you have your outer jacket pieces, which are these pieces here, and you're working on the inside, you just definitely need to first put in your facings, and then whatever else is left over is essentially the lining. Okay, but there's a couple of important things to know about lining. First of all, along the back of a jacket or a coat, you come out here and create a tuck or a pleat in the center, along the center back line. Okay, that's usually 2.5 centimeters you come out approximately. You could come out a bit more, I suppose. 2.5, 3 is standard. And you can come either all the way straight down, which is what I do if it's a jacket or coat of this length or longer. If it's a little bit shorter or a bit more fitted, I might veer it into nothing at the hem. Okay, so there's a couple of choices there. So you can see from here, this is our front construction and our front pattern piece, and then these are the two pieces here, essentially, that are the facing and the lining for the inside of the garment. So there is the important thing to note, I suppose, about lining, aside from adding this pleat in the back, is around the hem. So this is actually the hem of this jacket. What you have to know is your hem allowance that you're leaving, that you have on your coat or jacket. So if you have 5 centimeters, which I would recommend, I know 4 is good for skirts and trousers and that, but 5 is good for jackets, 5 or 6. So we imagine that there is a 5 centimeter hem allowance is being put on the bottom of our jacket and on our sleeve. And so on the actual construction of both the bodice section of the jacket and the sleeve section, you come up 5. So here's the hem of our jacket, and we're imagining the hem coming down 5, and we sort of reflect that up because the hem itself is going to fold back up, isn't it, and going to sit along here. So this has been, I kind of dotted a line in there. You could write on it lining hem, because this is where the lining would come down to. So this piece here, this pattern, is shorter than this one. Okay, so now the thing to know about the pattern at the bottom is that there's an extra thing that you add. So generally speaking, I only included the seam allowance on these pieces because there's something different that happens on them. The rest of all these pieces just get normal seam allowance right the way around. What happens in the lining is that you add a thing called overhang. So you see down here there is a section that we've added about 2.5 centimeters first, and I've kind of shaded it in to make it obvious, and then you add your seam allowance around that. So the overhang and the pleat in the back are there to add extra room, extra fabric into your lining. So you can think about the outside of the jacket and then the inside of the jacket, and it should be that there's quite a lot of fabric, extra fabric that can move around in the lining of the jacket. And this is because when you put your hand in to the arm, into the sleeve of a jacket, the lining pulls into the sleeve. So you need to leave some extra fabric so that as your arm goes in, the lining sort of goes in the down the sleeve with it, and so there's a little room, just a bit, it just kind of catches a bit and goes in, and so you have a little room here, so you're not getting ripping and tearing across there. There's a little room for that fabric to go in, and then it settles back down. It's the same across the back. You're putting this pressure, your arm is going in the armhole, and so there's a pulling across the center back, and that just allows a little bit of give. So your lining should actually be sort of loose or be sort of extra, and if you haven't noticed before, maybe you look inside of coats or jackets that you have that have lining, and you'll see at the hem there's this little bit of overhang. It just sort of droops over a little bit. It doesn't stick out because the hem is deep, so the hem is maybe 5 centimeters, and the overhang just comes down at like 1.5 centimeters over it, or 2 centimeters over it. So that's why we add this overhang here, and you do the very same on the sleeve. So you can see the sleeve came down. We estimated 5 centimeter hem. Imagine that folding up, so you draw your line across there, and then your lining pattern is exactly that, ending here, and then you add your overhang, and then don't forget your seam allowance. So when the lining sews to it, and actually it's important on these pattern pieces that when you add your hem allowance, that you also add a seam allowance. So you're not just folding that hem up and that's it, it's just been finished or overlocked or whatever. You're actually folding that hem up the 5, and then you want to sew it to a lining, so you need 1.5 extra on there, and then it will have its seam allowance. So that is the main, they're the main things on a pattern, like a lining pattern, to know. There are various other things that people do. Sometimes you'll see people shortening the armhole on the lining pattern and things like that. I do avoid all of that, partly because for beginners or people at an early stage in patterns, it's just simpler to stick to these two things. That's enough. And I don't really like any smallining of an armhole anyway, but yeah, so just to say, you might see in books or things other little things that people do. And this is a men's block. There is a couple of things that there's one extra thing that can happen in women's wear, particularly on fitted jackets, and I will do a different demonstration that outlines that. But most of these principles can be applied either to men's or women's wear. Okay, and then just to note, to put a couple of pockets on there just to randomly have design. So this pocket here would be, for example, a flap. So this little piece here would be flapping down. So when you were going into that pocket, you'd have to put your hand in under the flap to get into the pocket. So the pocket bag itself is behind the garment, so in between the front of the garment and the lining. Okay, and so is this pocket bag. This here is a welt, so it's a similar shape to that flap, but you put your hand in it, so the welt is here and the hand just goes straight in. So the welt is sewn on this side and this side. Okay, so they're just a little bit of terminology, and because they look the same on patterns, you wouldn't be able to know what they are until you label them. So you can see the little flap is down here, and it's been doubled because it would have to fold back into itself, and the pocket bag is also doubled because it would fold back up. And then here is the welt, and you can notice it's kind of fishtailed, or there's angles there because it's at an angle. So it's been doubled, and notice the straighter grains everywhere. So I haven't filled in all the labeling on these pieces, so of course you would always label them, the name of the garment, the name of the section of the garment, so the jacket, the back piece, and how many you're cutting to. And just notice for the pockets, for the flap, it's independent. It flaps up and it only really sews along one line, and so that's why there's only one line marked there. And the same, this mainly sews just along that line, but it does actually sew up each side too, so it has a little bit more markings. All right. So, and of course the buttons are marked in. So Yes, so hopefully that outlines the main things that you do in terms of lining, and it might help you get started on a pattern. And there is a few different things that, like I said, that you would do for women's wear, and I'll do a different demonstration for that. So best of luck with that.